Howdy, everybody. Humanities 4, Shasta College, Film Studies. One of the greatest forms of studying in the history of study is the study of cinema. Cinema is our collective art form that depicts who we are for 20 years. We can look back at old cinema as a time machine, and we can see how people looked, behaved, what cars they drove. But what doesn't change, fashions, hairstyles, cars change, but the human nature doesn't change. And so you can watch a Charlie Chaplin movie, a Buster Keaton movie, an Abel Gance movie. You can see human behavior really hasn't changed. Only the technology has changed. And that's the beauty of all art form, all arts. And you can't just look at it like it's a thing of the past. It's who we are now. There is no past. There's no future. There's only this moment. And we're living in a great moment for visual media. Look at your TikTok and your YouTube and all that stuff. That's the new cinema. It really is. And telling a story is what we're all about as humans on the planet Earth, telling our story. And you can tell it with a camera now. Anybody can afford the camera. That's the first time in the history of this technology that could happen. Before, it took a lot of money to, to hire cameramen and the whole bit. Anyway, have a little patience on your grading. I was at a no excuse, but I was away for the last week on a road trip, and I had the worst Wi-Fi in the history of Wi-Fi. Um, That's why I didn't have a second lecture last week. I'm sure you missed it. But I'm making effort this week, and I'll be grading your papers uh, for the next couple days to get them all done. Okay, today we're going to talk about a real important time in the history of our cinema, and that's the 1950s, which I've already discussed with you. We've gone over the new neorealism that is shaking the entire cinema world up, not just in Italy where it started, but here too with film noir and our storytelling abilities and the want and the need to tell stories in a more realistic, naturalistic way, not such a fairy tale way, showbizy way, fancy studio way that Hollywood, uh, was their bread and butter. But now we're in the Cold War with Soviet Union. That means we've got the threat of atomic attack in this country. It's real. When I was in grade school, we didn't have fire alarms, we had atomic bomb alarms. What to do if the atomic bomb was dropped? Where would they drop it here in Reading? Well, Shasta Dam was a target, supposedly. And it was a real deal. We thought it was going to happen eventually. They told us how to go home, what to do. You probably seen the funny documentaries on how to survive a nuclear attack, duck and cover. They told us how to hide underneath our desks and cover our heads. I hate to say it, folks, that's not going to help much. Anyway, but that was a real deal that we all grew up with, my generation. And now we still have the nuclear threat. Our beloved uh, Russia aren't that friendly with us. China's not that friendly with us. Korea would love to send a bomb over here. They're always threatening. They don't have one yet, but they're always threatening. So the threat continues with your generation. Um, I believe there will be one day somebody will send one of their missiles over here. We're probably lucky that we're here in Reading because we're not much targeted, but people who could be targeted, where they live, or it's in a big city, or it's a real threat. So we're living with it still. So that's the 50s were I hope you guys watch those documentaries, the House Un-American Activities, the communist witch hunts, and all that. Everybody thought communism is a brainwashing device, and filmmakers were making movies to brainwash us so we'll be good communists. Didn't happen, folks. Uh, but it was real for a long time because in the Communist Manifesto, it says to spread the word. And so that's what they were doing, spreading the word. It's just it didn't take in this country. It didn't take in a lot of countries. So that's what's going on in the background. Things are changing with music. We've got jazz has really made a big comeback. People like Miles Davis and John Coltrane, and it's new and it's different. Writing is changing. Novels are changing. Literature is changing. The post World War II writers are writing their best books they've ever written. People like Kurt Vonnegut and Joseph Heller, Kurt and Jack Kerouac are changing the literary scene. More people are educated than the history of this whole country because now the GI Bill is allowing people to go to college and paying for it. We're all living in the suburbs. Our parents have a car, maybe two cars. That's the first time in the history of this country we've had this kind of wealth. The country's being built up, freeways are being built, bridges, skyscrapers in big cities. The 50s was a prosperous time in the auto industry. We're building things. Now that's all stopped. We don't do that anymore. Everything's shipped off this overseas. But the 50s was a conservative time politically. Eisenhower was in the White House, and TV was taking over everything. Series like The Honeymooners and I Love Lucy and Leave It to Beaver. People are staying home and watching this stuff because it was free. You got to watch the ads, but we like the ads. And movies were losing the traction. People weren't going to the theater. It was too much to take families to the theater, too expensive, too much of a hassle. And so movies were trying to adjust to how they're going to get money when people are staying home and watching TV. Well, they're figuring out a way. And in the midst of all that, rock and roll started in, say, 54, 55 with Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and the Everly Brothers and Buddy Holly and BB King and everybody else. And that was a whole change in the music. It was for the youth. First time in history of this country, the youth had a huge say in what was being played on the radio, what was being seen in the theaters, what was being seen, the art of the 50s. Jackson Pollock and Willem Dafoe and Andy Warhol were starting to rise to fame. So the whole abstract expressionism and art was happening. It was this freedom of art. Yes, a lot of it was fueled with alcohol and marijuana. Absolutely. There was a new freedom to what was going on with the youth market, and they were demanding to see things they could relate to. The movies were no longer just for the parents. And so Hollywood didn't know what to do, but they started to making inroads with by discovering actors like Marlon Brando and James Dean and Montgomery Clift and Eva St. Marie and Marilyn Monroe, many, many others, Paul Newman, Steve McQueen. And it was a new form of acting. The anti-hero was created. No longer is the hero of the movie Clark Gable or Cary Grant or the great Humphrey Bogart. Those were heroes. We knew who they were, good guys standing for right and the great American way. This new form of hero was flawed. Marlon Brando's flawed and everything he ever did. And it's a beautiful flaw. It's a human flaw. Marlon Brando and James Dean brought in a new sensitivity to the macho male masculinity. And that was a nobody ever seen that before. And it was attributed to the actors studio in New York and Lee Strasberg in this new form of acting that was labeled the method. The method, if you know anything about acting, ever heard that term, it's essentially I will post a little documentary you should watch on the Lee Strasberg's Institute. Um, it was a form of acting that makes the actor, the person acting the character, try to make it as real as possible, not fake it, which is what they've been doing all those years. It, very well, but it made everybody seem flawless. And these guys were flawed, and the women, and they became very relatable to the everyman. They no longer were looking at big movie stars like Clark Gable. They were looking at people like James Dean and Marlon Brando, who kind of looked like we did and acted like we did and behaved like the common person. And that's why they were relatable. The method trains you to be in touch with your own happiness, your own pain, your own sorrow, your own tragedy. And so when you're acting in a scene and you're supposed to be sad, well, you're not faking it. You're thinking, it's called sense memory. You're thinking of a sad thing, whatever it is, your pet dying, your mom dying sick, somebody dying, and that gives you, so when you're sad on screen, it's real because what you're thinking about is actually making you sad. Um, Same thing with happy, same thing, it's sense memory. And that's what these actors were all taking classes at Lee Strasberg's, and other acting teachers were just as popular that came out of the same theater mentality of the Stanislavski system. And that's a Russian acting master who wrote his books, the Stanislavski method. That's why they call it the method acting. And it's all, he's a Russian person that was working at the early 20th century, but he published a book and everybody was reading it. They're trying to relate it to our lives, and it started a whole revolution of new form of acting that we're still in, by the way. So when people like Brando and James Dean came along, they were so revolutionary that they divided the country into people going, "Who are these people? They seem sloppy. They can't. They're mumbling. We can't hear what they're saying. They're not typically handsome, tall, like a movie star. They're flawed, like the rest of us." Hopefully, you saw those samples. I posted them last night. Watch them at your leisure. But those are the movies from the 50s. This is only the 50s I'm dealing with. Marlon Brando had a long career up until the 2000s. And yes, he became a different person than he was when he was young. He became kind of a caricature of himself, really overweight, and he was kind of people made fun of him because the young Brando was lean and mean and dangerous. James Dean only made 3 films in his short career. I posted all 3 previews. His best work, I believe, is East of Eden, based on the John Steinbeck novel. His second most famous work, and his most famous work that he's known for, is Rebel Without a Cause. Maybe heard of it. He's plays a high school student. He's a little old for that. Everybody else is too in that cast, but that's how they rolled. And then his last movie is called Giant, and he's paired with Rock Hudson and Elizabeth Taylor, and he plays a, a guy in Texas, Jet Rink, who discovers oil and becomes a billionaire. And he's brilliant in all these roles. Before Rebel Without a Cause came out, before Giant came out, James Dean was tragically killed in a car wreck at 24 years old. Um, and the world will never know what he could have done as he aged. Um, Real tragic. His most famous movie, Rebel Without a Cause, opened to huge acclaim with the youth market. Finally, they saw somebody they could relate to, somebody they could look up to, and he was already dead. It's like your famous, whatever your most famous hero, who is it in cinema? Is it Tom Cruise? What if you saw the first Top Gun and you just loved it, but Tom Cruise is already dead? It would take away what he could do for his future in your life in all of our lives. Well, James Dean was taken away before he got started, but he left a legacy that people are still talking about. Here I am, 65 years later, they're still talking about it, and they'll talk about it until we're done talking. So that's how important these guys were to cinema. I'm gonna sign you guys a paper this week, towards the end of the week, maybe Thursday. It's gonna be one of these movies. I'll tell you right now, it's gonna be either Rebel Without a Cause or On the Waterfront. I'm gonna give you I'm not gonna sign it yet, but you can watch it now if you want. If you listen to my lecture, if you don't, you won't get this message. They're on YouTube. You might have to pay a little fee. I'm not sure. I have to go check it. But On the Waterfront stars Marlon Brando. James Dean stars in Rebel Without a Cause. It's in color, by the way. And I'm going to give you the choice to write your essay on that. More about that later. Don't wait to the last minute to watch these essays. You're going to get screwed up. Meaning, because you have to watch the movie. You have to watch the movie and not just Wikipedia the information. I want you guys to analyze what you're seeing on the screen. How about the directing, the writing, the performing, not what Wikipedia is telling you or some outsized source. I want you to watch the movie and put your critical eye on it. You know what I want by now. Talk about that more later. It's important. It's called critical analysis, and I want it coming from your thoughts, your words. And I don't care if you're right or wrong, it doesn't matter as long as you're thinking. That's what I'm looking for. Not the fact that you did some research and you can regurgitate information. That's not what the essay is about. I'll post a new discussion. I don't know what it's going to be yet. I'll figure it out in the next day or so, and I'll post it um, soon, and I'll make the announcement. In the meantime, a great director died this week, Jean-Luc Godard, 91. He lived a long life. He's from France, and next week I'm going to be talking about his movies and other movies from France in the late 50s and early 60s, and they labeled them the French New Wave. It changed, like Italian neorealism, it changed the entire course of cinema history. And Jean-Luc Godard was at the head of that with his revolutionary film called Breathless. We'll be talking about it. You may have to write a paper about it. Be prepared. It's a foreign language film. Yes, you're going to have to read the subtitles. We'll talk about that next week. That's next week. Don't worry about it right now. So Jean-Luc Godard, I use a lot of his language in my lectures. He's the one that came up with the saying, everything is cinema. He said that in about 1961, and people thought it was a joke because how can everything be cinema? Think about it now, folks, with TikTok and YouTube and how we're taping, we're we're shooting our friends, we're shooting our pets, we're shooting our dinner we're eating. Everything has turned out to be cinema. He was ahead of his time. And he was making movies up until last year in 91. He was still in the game. Pardon my cough. But he lived a long life and he stuck to his guns. He was not a easy man. His subjects are difficult. They're very artsy. We might call them artsy, which sounds negative. To me, artsy means great, but other people make fun of it because it's hard to understand. He's not handing everything to you on a silver platter like we do in Hollywood. But he was very, very influenced by Hollywood, especially film noir. Howard Hawks, Alfred Hitchcock, those were his heroes. Uh, and Humphrey Bogart. And he made his films kind of his versions of those films that he admired so much in America cinema. Yeah. Anyway, rest in peace, Jean-Luc Godard, cinema master storyteller. With that, story continues next when I see you next.